Hi everybody, it's Marky Bilson, and I'm talking about the old adage, sports and politics shouldn't mix. There's a real big problem with that, though. They always have. And I don't care if you're talking about the 19th century when there was a big debate between professionalism and amateurism in sports, or just today when we talk about nicknames or logos in sports and all this. Sports has always been political. Antitrust exemption in baseball, integration, what have you. It's always been political, and it always will be. But the thing is, politics are divisive, and sports are supposed to bring us all together, rooting for the single team or what have you. And so, when a sports league or association becomes so identifiable with one side of the political coin, they're going to limit their audience. And that's what's going on now with Daryl Morey, the Houston Rockets general manager, who tweeted out support for Hong Kong, and somehow, some way, that became controversial. It's branding the NBA, not that it already wasn't, but it's branding the NBA as left-wing. And to show you how this can be a problem, look at NASCAR. I mean, NASCAR had tremendous growth a generation ago, but there was always that knock against it, say Jim Rome calling it neck car, that this was more of a sport for the conservative, for the heartland. It didn't have a lot of appeal in the left wing. I once remember Slate.com even writing in a column saying future generations will wonder why we actually had auto racing. This is how divisive culturally, my goodness, for how many years was their championship sponsored by a tobacco company? This is how divisive NASCAR had become, and they're suffering from it. Now, the Morey tweet and the reaction that the NBA has had, LeBron James' unfortunate comments 2 days ago, etc., it's not going to result in a boycott the NBA movement, certainly not like we saw with the NFL when Colin Kaepernick was kneeling for the national anthem. It's not going to have the open contempt that people seem to have really throughout its popularity boon for NASCAR. And even now you get people say, they won't be running races in 5 years. Or you've got that. And people are willing to dig its grave with great glee because it has become politically polarizing for one reason or another. Now, the NBA isn't going to receive that, and such is the state of contemporary American culture. But what could happen, and I think it will, is a silent revolt. In fact, I think it's going on right now. I listen to sports talk radio. It used to be after my show, Colin Cowherd came on afterwards. And NBA media is always sympathetic to the sport. There's not this, in football, it's too violent, the referees are terrible, this sort of thing, the criticism of the sport. We see the criticism of the actual sport from the baseball commissioner. We can't have pitchers throwing 4 balls for an intentional walk. That takes too much time. We've got to speed up the game. Rob Manfred directs his game like there's something wrong with it. You don't have that in the NBA. You have very apologetic media and a lot. I'll give you an example. ESPN, who spent more for the NBA rights than they have the NFL rights to broadcast their game by $800 million, as a matter of fact. It'll be the middle of the summer, and I'll see where SportsCenter is leading off with the Summer League when there are big mid-season baseball games. Or check out National Sports Talk Radio during the summer these days. There's very little baseball talk. In fact, Colin Cowherd, like I mentioned before, a lot of his commentary after the NBA Finals continues to talk about basketball until football season begins in full swing. There's very little baseball talk. But even with that, the NBA Finals, check the ratings out last year, they only exceeded the World Series by a very slight amount, and you've even got a situation right now where the NBA All-Star Game this past year had comparable ratings to the Stanley Cup Finals, and the Stanley Cup Finals were on one network. The NBA All-Star Game was broadcast on two. The individual games of the Stanley Cup Finals, it should be said, were on just one network. They were, two games were on NBCSN, the other five were on NBC. But there were only one network broadcasted. Two networks broadcast the NBA All-Star Game, but check out the ratings. Very, very comparable. And here basketball is supposed to be so much more popular than hockey. I'll tell you what the problem is. The problem is the NBA is so identifiable with the left that a pro-democracy tweet is considered unkosher, and yet sympathy for the Communist Party of China is lauded. Now, half the country will always silently ignore the NBA if that's the case. That's why it'll always be stuck at number 2. I'm Morey Bilson.